The transgender community must be feeling nothing short of terrified today. President Trump's only been in office less than 24 hours, but already a whole slew of executive orders have been announced, in addition to a law passed earlier this week banning transgender participation in female sports. The executive orders announced today do things like refusing to acknowledge any gender other than the gender that they were assigned at birth, requiring organizations that receive federal funds like prisons and shelters to create single-sex areas that they can only be assigned to based on their gender at birth, rescinding federal funding from agencies that have programs that recognize somebody's transgender status, and more. And when you think about the sheer number of legislative or executive orders to target this particular population, you need to think about that in relation to the actual size of the transgender population. A 2022 study by a think tank at UCLA's law school estimated that there are about 1.3 million transgender individuals out of 332 million US citizens, which is less than 1/2 of 1%. And within the school-age community, there are only about 300,000 students between the ages of 13 and 17 who identify as transgender. So that's about 1.4%. When you take it all the way down to athletes, it's difficult to know exactly how many transgender athletes there are because of privacy laws, but there are estimates that say there can't be more than about 100 transgender individuals participating in female sports. And in spite of the small size of that population, between 2018 and 2022, 48 different anti-trans laws were passed in the United States across 19 different states, which is quite a large number for such a small population. And the result of that was that when the Trevor Project did a study of 61,000 transgender youth, they found that all that negative rhetoric surrounding all of that anti-trans legislation had a significant impact on the mental health of those transgender youth. And the suicide rate among transgender people between the ages of 13 and 24 increased from 38 to 44%, depending on the cohort that they studied. And that's just an astonishing number on its own, but it's especially shocking when you think about the baseline suicide rate that we started from. In a 2022 study, it was found that 37.2% of transgender people who were assigned male at birth and 42.7% of transgender people who were assigned female at birth reported that they had attempted a suicide at some point in their life. And, that's a big, big, big number. And it's not, unilaterally a cultural war along party lines. There are 3 Republican governors who did veto laws prohibiting transgender youth from participating in women's sports, but 2 of those 3 vetoes were subsequently overridden by the state legislature. I do think the words of Utah's Republican Governor Spencer Cox are particularly helpful in terms of thinking about this. At the time that a bill was introduced to ban transgender youth from female sports in Utah, there were only 4 athletes across the entire student-athlete population of 85,000 in Utah's public high schools that had been identified, and only 1 of those were participating in women's sports. When he vetoed it, he wrote about his decision, explaining his rationale and citing the high suicide rates among transgender youth. And he said that these are just 4 kids who are trying to find some friends and trying to fit in and feel like they're a part of something. They're 4 kids just trying to get through each day. Rarely has so much anger and fear been directed at so few. He said, I don't understand what they're going through or why they feel the way they do, but I want them to live. So how do you feel about this? Is this a culture war being waged by politicians to stir up their voting base, or does this intense focus on anti-transgender legislation really reflect the issues that are a top priority for the American people. Tell us what you think.